very oppressive towards their population has not been a successful policy in the Middle East. And clearly also talking about the Muslim Brotherhood threat is not the way to go forward. I think there would be a democratic system.
Simon Sharma, what revolution does this remind you of, if any at all?
None. The thing about revolutions, they all have elements, as you said, Jeremy, quite rightly. They all begin with a kind of commanding leadership of the talking classes, but the talking classes look ridiculous unless they're supported by economic grievances, which goodness knows there are. We've had a lot of news about strikes taking place throughout the country, and also by a kind of genuine fury on the part of ordinary people, and we've seen a lot of that in the street. So the ingredients can be the same, but the way they work out, again, I come back to the notion, nations, some of us may want them not to be as real and substantial. Nations come with language, with history, with particular traditions, and that's so true of Egypt. It's a situation crying out for someone who can be an incarnation of a new, free, reborn democratic Egypt. And I have to say, if American policy doesn't believe in its own principles, then it's really, you know, one should liquidate the State Department tomorrow. There are moments when principles are not necessarily counter to interests, and this is one of them.
Okay, thank you all very much. Thanks. Now, it's perhaps inappropriate to bracket the protests against government cuts in this country and elsewhere with the struggle of a people, or part of a people, for the democracy we take for granted. But it's undeniable that 2011 has begun with unrest all over. Furthermore, the protests seem, if only in the way they're organised, to have several things in common. Paul Mason has noticed more.
From Paris to Cairo, there's a zeitgeist of protest, but why now? At the heart of the movement is a new sociological type, the graduate with no future. With Facebook, Twitter, YFrog, etc., they can express themselves independent of the mainstream media and despite repressive regimes. Truth seems to travel faster than lies, and propaganda is getting questioned, challenged in real time. Today's global protest generation seem immune to hermetic ideologies: Bolshevism, Labourism, Islamism, constitutional Irish nationalism. The gender mix has changed too. The archetypal protest leader, organiser, facilitator, spokesperson now is usually an educated young woman. But sociology is only part of the story. Probably the key factor is horizontalism, which has become the default method of organising things. Technology makes it easy. The speed of doing things compensates for their relative lack of organisation. A swarm of disorganised people can effect change against a slow-moving, hierarchical body. And then there are so-called memes. Ideas that arise are quickly market tested and then either take off, bubble under, insinuate themselves into the mainstream culture, or, if they're no good, disappear. It can be a few lyrics snatched from a song, a piece of street art. But the meme can be as powerful in guiding the actions of people as the old, cadenced, sound-bitten public speeches of yesteryear.
A brilliant intellect, shaped by the great Englishmen of the past and the best teachers of Cambridge.
One powerful meme is about a broken promise. Get a degree and you'll get a job that makes you better off than your parents were. In many countries, the young now believe that promise has been broken, and the effect has been like throwing a light switch. The prosperity story has been replaced with the doom story, even if for individuals reality will be more complex. Plus, in a place like Egypt, even 5% economic growth can't absorb the democratic bulge of young people fast enough. Meanwhile, in an information age, regimes based on the suppression of information find it hard to adapt or even survive.
Well, to discuss this, we're joined now from Duke University, North Carolina, by Professor Michael Hart. He's the author of Empire, which has been described as a modern-day Communist Party manifesto. Still here is Simon Sebag Montefiore in London, and Gigi Ibrahim is back with us from Cairo. Gigi, do you feel part of an international movement?
Yes, I mean, you know, it started in Tunisia for the Arab world and the Middle East, and the domino effect has taken place all the way here in Egypt, and also in Jordan, in Yemen, in Libya, and more to come.
But that's specific to the Arab world. Do you see it having broader connections than that?
I mean, you could say that even in countries that are not necessarily, you know, in the Middle East or third world countries, there has been a lot of protests and strikes concerning, you know, education cuts or you know, spending cuts, and it's definitely a trend of this global recession that we're living in, and how, you know, disparity have been really showing in countries across the globe. Even the well-off countries, they still have this middle class that's completely deteriorating, and the state failing to fulfill this gap. So,
now, Michael,
yes,
okay,
so I can see it's a trend.
Michael Hart, do you see common factors?
Absolutely. I mean, some of them are quite clear. This current wave of struggles in the Arab world started around labor questions about unemployment, questions about frustrated desires of educated populations. These seem to me quite similar, and also similar are, and common to many places. You mentioned Europe was mentioned in the report, but I would also talk about Latin America in terms of new organizational structures, horizontal structures, a kind of multiplicity of the components of these struggles for freedom and democracy.
It is certainly true, Simon Sebag Mutafiori, isn't it, that there are now involved in quite a number of protests and struggles of one kind or another, a lot of unemployed graduates or graduates who have severe anxiety about the future. That is a difference, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there are things. Of course, there are things in common. I mean, of course, there's Twitter in common, there's Facebook in common. There's this graduates without hope of employment in common. But there are huge differences too. I think, you know, Gigi in Cairo really puts it right when she said that this has had an effect on the Arab world. Politics is still local. You know, I think that's the key point about this. You know, this is an Arab movement. Egypt is the cockpit of the Arab world, and the effect is going to be felt, reverberate across the Arab world. I think there's very little in common between middle-class students marching outside the Houses of Parliament and people who are protesting against torture and a police state in Egypt, and they really are fighting for different things.
And the Middle East has a very, very youthful population, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a huge difference too. I mean, you know, these young people in Egypt, we see them on our screen now. I mean, they have lost all contact with this old generation of these kind of these old dictators whose sort of dyed hair resembles a sort of cruise ship crooner, you know. And they really have, I think, very little in common with this, and there's a huge gap. That isn't true in, say, England or America, where you have these very dynamic young leaders in Obama and Cameron, for example.
Gigi, do you see this as a generational matter in Cairo?
I would say there is, but it's also about the principles. I mean, anybody, you old or young, will feel the loss of human dignity just walking in the street, being harassed by a police, let alone, you know, getting paid 200 maybe or 100 even Egyptian pounds a month when the kilo of tomato is 10 pounds. I mean, this is just humiliation through daily struggles, and anybody could feel that. So yes, the age gap, I mean, different ages will feel different struggles, but in the end, it's feeling like you're not being treated as a human being.
Michael Hart, you've already alluded to the influence of social media and so on. One gets the impression when you look at these old rulers and these young protesters that, you know, the old guys are trapped in the analog world and the unrest belongs in the digital world. I mean, is that just too glib a comparison? Because there are different ways of organising going on, aren't there?
Right, I would say so. I mean, I think some of the talk about social media, about Facebook and Twitter, mistakes the mistakes thinking about them as cause. They're really symptom. The use of social media is a symptom of new possibilities of organizing and new modes of organizing. I think that it's a danger from outside of such struggles to misrecognize as leaderless, as chaotic modes of organizing that do form, like I was saying, horizontally, that form autonomous structures in not according to conventional rules, not according to conventional party structures, not according to conventional ideologies. I think that is that in a way the prevalence, or at least in the reporting outside of the Middle East, the prevalence of Facebook or Twitter or other forms of social media is a symptom of something that we have yet to recognize. Recognize well the horizontal modes of organizing that those are tools in.
Where does ideology play in all of this, Gigi? I mean, do you have an ideology?
Of course I do. I would associate myself as a revolutionary socialist, but you know, a lot of other people will still, you know, use the same means with different ideologies.
Michael Hart, do you see what role does ideology play in all of this?
Well, I think it's really. I assume. Oh, Gigi, go ahead.
No, let me ask you, Mike.
No, I thought you were
going to ask you, Mike. Fine. It was easy to get confused.
Right. Yeah. I think we should remember. I mean, it was striking for me how in 1999 at the Seattle WTO protests, and then continuing through this cycle of globalization protests in North America and Europe, how difficult it was for the journalists to recognize what was going on as something that wasn't chaotic and wasn't also unideological, but rather there were a plurality of groups and a plurality of interests organized in a kind of network structure. And I think it took a long time to recognize that. It seems quite possible, and it's still, of course, in the process of development, that similar kind of new kinds of organizing are present in what's going on in Egypt and in Tunisia and other parts of the Middle East.
All right, thank you, all three of you, very much. Thanks. Now you can read more about the crisis in Egypt from Tim Whewell and watch the films he made during his time in Cairo on our website. The government's new deal with the banks, under which they're supposed to lend more to businesses and to be a bit less greedy in their bonuses, was announced today. A triumphant attempt to move forward, suggested the Chancellor, at which the Liberal Democrats' Treasury spokesman in the House of Lords hyperventilated. He denounced the deal, which, being as his party's part of the coalition, he shouldn't really have done, so he got himself the sack. Here's what Lord Oakeshott, for it is he, had to say.
If this is robust action on bank bonuses, my name's Bob Diamond and I'm going to claim my £9 million bonus next week. It does make useful progress on lending and on disclosure, though like a lot of toxic products the banks offer us, the headlines are a lot better than small print.
Well, it's very embarrassing. Michael Crick, I should say, is with us now. Michael Crick, very embarrassing, isn't it, for the coalition?
It is, rather. I mean, the Lib Dem High Command are trying to play down the post of Treasury spokesman in the Lords. They're saying, well, it's not an official post.
But it's not exactly a household name.
No, but he is actually an important economic player, financial player within the Liberal Democrats. He was part of Vince Cable's team before the election. He's still very close to Vince Cable, treated by both the media and people in the business world as somebody with Vince Cable's ear. And I'm sure that Vince Cable shares some of his misgivings. He feels that today's deal basically amounts to nothing, that the coalition, the Treasury, the government's been taken for a ride by the banks. He feels, I think, that Nick Clegg has put up a good fight, but really the problem is within the Treasury, a view that he expressed on this programme a few weeks ago, and that in particular that there is no, if you read the small print, there's no commitment to increase net lending to small businesses, and that the provisions to deal with bank bonuses are all pretty meaningless.
It'll blow over, though, won't it?
It will, but I do think that Matthew Oakeshott's views are shared probably by most Liberal Democrats, and indeed by some Conservatives as well. They feel that this agreement is nothing, is feeble in comparison with what both parties were saying, certainly before the election, and indeed since the election to a degree as well. But I don't think we're going to see lots of other resignations. But he'll be an important player now, and we'll be hearing, I suspect, a fair bit more from him in the months ahead.
Michael, thank you. Quick look at some of tomorrow morning's front pages now. The Times has news that the Saudis apparently have offered to prop up Mubarak if President Obama pulls the plug on him. The Guardian has revelations about the Egyptian army. The